Looking at the profits some airlines make, you might think that setting up one of your own would be a good idea. Well, actually, it would be a terrible idea. In fact, it would be a bonkers idea. And in this video, I'm going to explain why. Firstly, let's look at some sobering facts. Airline failure rates are high, probably the highest of any industry out there. On average, the chance that a new airline will still be trading within 5 years of establishment varies between 40 and 60%. So let's look at some figures. In 2017, 78 airlines were founded and 25 failed. In 2020, the year of the pandemic, 20 airlines were established and 31 failed. And as of August 2021, when I'm recording this video, 8 were founded and 13 failed. So as you can see, some years are good for airline startups and some are bad. The truth is, setting up an airline is hard. It's really hard. And keeping it in business long term is harder still. In some respects, it may be one of the most difficult businesses of all to establish and make successful. Firstly, a little bit of history. Back in the 1920s and 30s, when commercial aviation was taking off, many governments introduced laws to regulate this new industry. A lot of these regulations were to do with things such as safety, air traffic control and accident investigation, but they also regulated the business of aviation. For example, limiting the numbers of airlines that could be established and requiring airlines to seek regulatory approval to start new routes. Such business regulation was introduced to ensure that existing airlines could develop and grow in a stable market. It was also used as a tool by many nations to establish flag carriers, national airlines that would serve the world, mostly state-owned, but some, notably in America, being privately owned. Having a national flag carrier airline was seen as something to be proud of and give your nation visibility around the world. The problem with airline business regulation was that it benefited existing airlines. New airlines wanting to enter the market found it hard to compete on existing routes because incumbents could just simply object to them starting up on those routes. For example, it took Southwest Airlines, the pioneer of low-cost flying, 4 years between conception to its first flights taking off due to the number of legal actions that were started by incumbent airlines. The United States Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 was the first piece of legislation to remove many of the regulations that governed the business side of the aviation industry. Over the next few decades, most governments around the world did the same thing, making it easier for new entrants to enter the market. No longer did airlines have to ask permission to start new routes, nor could incumbents object. This has led to a vibrant aviation industry where the number of new entrants has increased, giving more choice to consumers. Of course, it wasn't all plain sailing, as some legacy airlines suffered greatly. For example, Braniff, TWA and Pan Am all failed in the years following, with many blaming deregulation. The fact is that legacy airlines did not have the flexibility that the new upstart entrants to the industry possessed, and they struggled to adapt to a more cost-effective, rapidly changing landscape. So while deregulation has allowed anyone to enter the aviation market, thus increasing competitiveness and lowering ticket prices, it has also introduced a degree of volatility. So now that we've looked at the history, let's look at what it takes to start an airline. Let's start with the basics. You think you've identified an opportunity. Maybe 2 cities poorly served by existing airlines, or maybe you think you can compete with an existing airline by offering a better product or a lower price service. Well, first, you need to make sure you're correct in your thinking. You will need a business plan and agreement from the airports you wish to serve. Don't even think about creating that business plan without input from experienced aviation industry professionals, otherwise you're pretty much doomed to failure. Now that you have a business plan, you can go looking for funding. Unless you have very deep pockets, you're going to have to find backers to pay your very high startup costs. This is easier said than done, but let's assume you do find someone willing to put forward the money to get you up and running. The next thing you'll need is an air operator certificate. This is a document issued by your nation's civil aviation regulator, and it gives you the permission to create and operate an airline. It sets out where you can operate, what kind of planes you can use, and what type of operations you may perform. Getting one of these is quite a challenge. You must demonstrate that you have a good management structure, have appropriately qualified staff. You must explain how you will maintain your aircraft and how you will train your staff, and what you will do if there's an accident or other unusual incident. The application is written in the style of a safety case. Instead of a box-ticking exercise where the new airline says they will comply with the rules, a safety case requires them to explain how they will comply with the rules, complete with supporting evidence. Compiling such an application requires the assistance of experienced experts, and it's not unusual for airline startups to have to make multiple applications before theirs is accepted. So now you have your airline operator certificate. You'll now need to get yourself some planes, some crew, and to get yourself set up at the airports you wish to serve. The problem is planes are expensive, really expensive. A new Boeing 737 will set you back about $125 million. A decent second-hand one that's not too old will probably cost upwards of $30 million. Of course, you can buy older models for less, but they will be more costly to maintain and more prone to failure, which will have a significant impact on your bottom line, since airlines only make money when their planes are in the air. So unless you have very rich benefactors willing to stump up the money to buy a few new planes, leasing them is the only practical way to get hold of them. And there are two ways to lease: dry and wet. A dry lease is simple. You go to one of the many aviation leasing companies, sign an agreement that will last from 1 to 20 years, and they'll provide you with a plane. So long as you keep up the monthly payments and look after the plane, you can keep using it. At the end of the lease, you can give it back to the lessor or just buy it outright. With a dry lease, you have to provide your own crew, both cabin and cockpit, and take on the responsibility of maintaining the plane. A wet lease is basically chartering a plane. The lessor, which is usually a special type of airline that doesn't actually run any scheduled services of its own, will provide you with a plane, cockpit crew, and take care of all the maintenance. All you have to do is sell tickets, provide the cabin crew, and deal with the airport side of things. If you plan to work this way, then you will pay more in leasing fees, and the planes will probably be a bit older and a bit dated from a customer experience point of view, but you'll get your airline operational a bit faster. In reality though, if you have any ambitions about growing your airline, you will go with a dry lease, and only use wet leases for covering seasonal variations and things like mechanical failures and unexpected incidents. Now you're going to need some crew. You can hire them via an agency, or you can hire your own. If you hire your own, you will need a proper training facility and associated infrastructure. Hiring, on the other hand, through an agency offers flexibility, but it'll cost you more. And also, you'll need a lot more crew members than you think. There are strict limits on how long your crew can work, so you'll always need spare crew in reserve as cover for incidents caused by diversions, cancellations and delays. So now you have your planes and your crew, you'll also need to get set up at the airports you're serving. Firstly, there's an upfront fee to pay for your slots. A slot allows an airline to land and take off at an airport at a certain time of the day. There is an upper limit to how many slots an airport can provide based on when the airport is open, how many runways it has, and what types of plane are in use. This limit affects the price of slots. So for example, smaller airports away from major population centres will offer cheaper slots as they try to attract business. For major airports at capacity, you'll probably have to buy a slot from an existing airline, as the airport may not have any more to sell. An extreme example of this is Oman Airways, who bought a slot at Heathrow Airport for $75 million from Air France KLM. You'll also have to pay a fee for every takeoff and landing. That could cost anything from a few dollars in a rural airport, desperate for traffic, through to thousands in big hub airports like Heathrow or JFK. You will also need to pay terminal rent and the cost of using facilities such as check-in desks, luggage handling and so on. You will need airport staff to man your check-in desks, load luggage into your planes and man the departure gates. You could hire your own staff or use an aviation services partner. In most cases you will use such a partner, as airlines will generally only hire their own staff in airports where their hubs are based and they have a lot of activity going on. And let's not forget airplane maintenance if you're dry leasing. In most cases, you will contract this out to specialist providers. And of course, there are a load of other little things that you'll need to get up and running. For example, you need a ticketing system, a website, maybe some apps, an advertising budget, and a load of customer services and back office staff. Oh, and let's not forget about things such as in-flight meals and shopping. So you've spent millions already on getting your basic airline service up and running. Now you are at the mercy of one of the most volatile industries out there. Let's take fuel for example. The price of it has the biggest impact on an airline's profitability. The problem is that the price constantly fluctuates. This chart demonstrates how over the last 20 years the price in dollars for a gallon of aviation fuel has bounced between 50 cents and $4. The people who work out ticket prices will have a pretty good idea how much fuel is used for each flight. But when they price tickets months ahead of the actual flight, how can they be sure that the fuel prices won't suddenly increase in the meantime? For example, a Boeing 737 holds 6,875 gallons of fuel. Imagine the potential financial impact if the price of fuel went up by 10%, 20%, or even 50% between the time you put the tickets on sale and the time the flight takes place. These sort of jumps have happened in the past. Airlines avoid this by hedging, a process where the airline agrees to buy fuel in the future at an agreed price now. If the price of fuel goes above the hedged price, the airline wins. If it goes the other way, the airline loses. Now that being said though, the main reason for hedging is not to gamble on a better fuel price, but to ensure pricing certainty, making it easier to budget for the future. Another factor that affects airlines is weather, such as storms, heavy snow, lightning and fog. For example, Heathrow Airport is occasionally swamped by fog that stops all traffic. When that happens, airlines will have to take a significant financial hit and also have to placate angry passengers by offering compensation, upgrades or hotel accommodation. Or in the case of storms, planes may need to divert to another airport. The airline will then have to accommodate those diverted passengers and find a way to get them to their destination. Regulatory factors also play a part. Governments and regulatory agencies are constantly adding, removing and tweaking aviation regulations relating to things such as financial regulation, how tickets are sold, safety, maintenance issues, as well as security. Usually such changes are simple and airlines can take them in their stride, but often they can have a big impact. For example, the EU's flight compensation regulations, which for the first time forced airlines to compensate passengers for delayed or cancelled flights. This meant that airlines now had a new and potentially substantial financial burden to account for. Another example of regulatory changes impacting airlines is the UK's air passenger duty charge, which was blamed for being the primary cause of Flybe's collapse in 2020. And don't forget the impact of competition. Unless you're operating on a quiet route, you'll probably be competing with some other airlines. The competition might be gentle or cutthroat. While competition is good for consumers, when it gets so cutthroat that airlines are making a loss, then something has to give. Another vitally important factor to consider is that airlines don't make money year-round. There is a reason why new routes are usually launched just before the summer peak, because generally airlines make most of their money in the summer months when leisure and holiday traffic peaks. The problem for airlines though is that bills still have to be paid year-round. Every month they need to pay for airplane leases, maintenance, airports fees, staff wages and a load of other things. An airline needs to make enough money during its peak periods to cover these costs year-round. The alternative is to get into debt, which is generally a bad idea. And of course there are the headline-grabbing incidents such as safety problems, crashes, terrorist incidents, and things like that can also lead to an airline's downfall. A good example of this is the grounding of the 737 MAX and how that affected airlines globally, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which has slashed passenger numbers around the world. And all this is just the basic stuff. We haven't even looked at all the other issues you will need to address when running an airline, such as will you offer business class or first class? Will you be part of an alliance? Or will you code share with another airline? So the question is, if airlines operate in one of the most volatile business environments in existence, just how do you launch a successful airline? Well, it seems to be a mixture of factors. Firstly, any new startup needs to employ people who really understand the aviation industry. The airline really needs to be able to read the market and quickly adapt. For example, if you're a mid-frills airline and your low-cost rivals are taking the spoils, can you adapt? Your pricing strategy needs to be spot on. To be profitable, you'll want your planes to preferably only fly when full. To get them full, you'll need to be able to know what your passengers are willing to pay for the level of service you are offering. You'll need to be able to absorb the impact of unexpected changes and incidents such as bad weather, safety incidents and regulatory changes. This is much easier for established airlines who have built up reserves. But most importantly of all, you will need a fair bit of luck. The modern aviation industry is super competitive, and to be successful, an airline needs not only to be well managed, but to have all the factors it can't control go in its favour. A good example of this is what happened in 2020. Any airline set up in 2019 will have struggled to make it through the COVID crisis of 2020. So when I said setting up an airline is bonkers, I really meant it. Even with lots of investment and having the right people on board to help you set up your airline, you're still at the mercy of multiple factors you have absolutely no control over. Plus, creditors in the airline industry are merciless. Owe an airport money? Well, they'll put a tug in front of your plane to stop them taking off. Late with a leasing payment on your planes? Then they'll be repossessed within hours. Airlines can only be profitable by being ruthlessly efficient in their operation and being incredibly careful in how they do business. The airline industry is one where mistakes aren't tolerated. The reality is that airlines operate on a knife edge, always trying to stay one step ahead of the competition and avoiding problems caused by factors they have no control over. You need to be bonkers to set up a business in an industry where you have so little control of the factors that will determine whether it will succeed or fail.